For the past 3 years, in my capacity as the General Secretary of the Free Speech Union, I've been one of the leaders of what I call the anti-woke coalition. It's a loose coalition of writers, journalists, broadcasters, artists, podcasters, YouTubers, Substackers, academics, intellectuals, politicians, united in their opposition to the new authoritarian ideology that has swept through the English-speaking world in the last 10 years or so. Postmodern neo-Marxism, the successor ideology, critical social justice theory, Wokeist Day. And it's been described as a cult, but a cult, the word cult implies a small group organized around a charismatic leader with socially deviant beliefs. But wokeism, by contrast, boasts tens, if not hundreds of millions of converts. The core beliefs of the movement aren't deviant. So let's just quickly rattle through those core beliefs: that English-speaking countries are systemically racist, that we're in the midst of a climate emergency, that capitalism is responsible for most of the world's ills, that sex, as well as gender, is a social construct, that identity is forged by your membership of various groups, particularly your racial groups, and that different identity groups can be ranked according to how oppressed they are, with the most beleaguered being the most sacred. These beliefs aren't in any way deviant. They comprise the reigning orthodoxy of the managerial professional class in the UK, the US, and increasingly continental Europe. It's those who challenge these orthodoxies who are the deviants. To publicly dissent from these shibboleths is to risk social ostracization and professional ruin. It's not a cult, it's a religion. I think it could probably be described as the first new religion of the 21st century. Now, that's not a particularly original observation, but I think it's worth reiterating in case anyone is in any doubt. Its beliefs aren't based on science or reason, but on something resembling metaphysics, as unassailable in their own way as the nature of Christ or the Holy Trinity. It has its own religious symbols, the pride flag, as well as a liturgy, Black History Month, Trans Day of Remembrance. It has its own rites, taking the knee, doing the work, engaging in public bouts of racial self-flagellation. It even has its first martyr in the form of George Floyd. Sometimes this new religious movement seems completely unstoppable. In spite of the Conservative victory, the landslide Conservative victory in 2019, in which the Jeremy Corbyn-led Labour Party was reduced to a rump, it got the fewest amounts of seats Labour has won since 1935, in part, I think, because of Corbyn's embrace of identity politics, his rejection of faith, flag, and family, particularly flag, the fact that there wasn't a single conflict, international conflict in living memory that Britain had been involved in which Jeremy Corbyn didn't take our enemy's side. I think all of that contributed to his resounding defeat in 2019 and the Conservatives' 80-seat majority. But to echo what Lois was saying and to paraphrase Evelyn Waugh, that victory didn't set the clock back by a single second. The long march through the institutions continued, with one citadel after another falling to the pink-haired conquistadors. Now, the Free Speech Union has achieved some significant victories, it's won some significant battles, but it often feels like we're losing the war. There's something Hydra-like about the combined forces of the woke left. Every time you cut off one head, 3 grow in its place. And I sometimes ask myself, are we going about this the wrong way? So instead of struggling to hold back the incoming woke tide, why not let it wash over us. Why not let the woke win? That was actually an argument put forward by George Hours, an upstanding member of the anti-woke coalition, a publisher, and only half in jest. At the moment, the SJWs are in power, but not in office, enabling them to rule in an extrajudicial, unaccountable way. So people who fall foul of woke speech codes aren't prosecuted, which would at least entitle them to some due process. They're cancelled. Contemporary Britain and America, George argues, are enthralled to a new public morality. But because it's inchoate and unofficial, it's more tyrannical in some respects than the public morality associated with the pre-Reformation Catholic Church or post-Reformation Protestantism. At least in the past, dissenters knew where they stood. There was a relatively stable theological doctrine embedded in state law. People knew where the line was and what their punishment would be if they crossed it. By contrast, the line demarcating the morally acceptable from the unacceptable today is constantly shifting. There is no holy see in the new Vatican. In other words, the new public morality has an intrinsically totalitarian character because of the refusal of its priests to take the final step and assume the robes of office. So instead of fighting a rearguard action against the armies of the woke, maybe we should just throw down our arms and surrender. Force them to accept the lesson of the Spider-Man movies. With great power comes great responsibility. If they assume the robes of office, if there is a fusion between this unofficial morality and the laws of the state, it would at least force the high priests of this new religion to iron out some of the contradictions, some of the incoherent elements in their particular credo, which would mean a return to some semblance of the rule of law. And the woke equivalents of the Test Act and the Corporation Acts might in due course lead to an act of toleration, protecting the rights of dissenters. If we force the woke commissars out of the shadows, George argued, and get them to take power, if the blob takes human form, perhaps eventually it might lead to a glorious revolution. Just as this new religious movement seems to take succor from being in opposition, perhaps political success might drain it of some of its demonic life force. Well, it won't surprise you to learn that I'm not completely convinced by George's argument. For one thing, would the new Puritan Protectorate be as short-lived as the previous one, which lasted from 1653 to 1659? What guarantee is there that the new Oliver Cromwell would be some weak, feeble-minded soy boy and not some terrifying Robespierre figure? For the defeated rabble of the anti-woke coalition, being sent to a re-education camp might be reserved for the foot soldiers with a far more unpleasant fate awaiting its leaders. As C.S. Lewis said, of all the tyrannies, a tyranny sincerely exercised for the good of its victims may be the most oppressive. So I think we should carry on waging guerrilla war, harrying the enemy's supply lines, blowing up ammunition dumps, and swelling the ranks of the resistance. The lesson of the Vietnam War is that guerrilla armies can win. And there are, I think, some signs that we're winning. A new religion that has sprung up so quickly in the past 10 years, fueled by social media, may fizzle out equally quickly. We may have reached, dare I say it, peak woke. In the past 12 months alone, we've witnessed the fall of the Scottish tyrant, the landslide gubernatorial victory of Ron DeSantis, and the self-immolation of Bud Light. Talk about get woke, go broke. The highest grossing movie of last year wasn't Lightyear or Strange World or Bros or She Said or Warrior Queen. It was Top Gun Maverick. And here's another reason to be cheerful. The prelates of Wokeist Day keep pushing the greatest geniuses in the history of mankind into our column. So in the past few months, Shakespeare, Picasso, and P.G. Wodehouse have all been cancelled. They join Winston Churchill, Thomas Jefferson, the inventor of statistics, James Watson, Dr. Seuss, Roald Dahl, J.K. Rowling. I mean, let's just pause for a second and think about the insanity of a so-called progressive movement cancelling, excommunicating J.K. Rowling. I mean, here is a woman, a single mother, living on benefits, a survivor of domestic violence, who through sheer grit, courage, and imagination, above all imagination, became the best-selling author, I think, of all time. She became at one point, I think, apart from the Queen, the richest woman in Britain, and may still be. And yet, in spite of her extraordinary success, she followed Schiller's advice and remained true to the dreams of her youth, and was faithful to the progressive values she'd held as a young woman. She supported the Labour Party. She gave money to Gordon Brown. Her books, Harry Potter, the saga, has probably done more to inculcate progressive values in millennials than almost any other cultural artifact. And yet, the woke left doesn't want her. What political future does a movement have that doesn't want a woman of that caliber? Well, thank you. We'll take her. Thank you. I mean, it surely won't be long before no best-selling author, no brilliant scientist, no Nobel Prize winner hasn't been pushed out by the purity police, which is quite something when you think about it. You would think that at some point the penny would drop, that associating all these brilliant luminaries with your opponents isn't the best way to discredit them. Just finally finish up. So what ultimately will do for this religious movement? Why do I think it is bound to fail? I think ultimately it's the emptiness of it, the turgid unimaginativeness, the absence of any sense of humour. It's what George Orwell called a smelly little orthodoxy, which is why it's inspired no great literature, no great art, no Cardinal Newman, no Adoration of the Magi, no Sistine Chapel. It's an intellectual desert, a cultural wasteland. And incidentally, no woke poet has produced anything that even comes close to the wasteland, even if it was written by a dead white European male. Cancel T.S. Eliot too. We'll take him alongside all the others, and together, in an alliance of free thinkers, past and present, we'll drive the new Puritans from our shores. Join the resistance. Thank you.